Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third of the series of our return to workforce safely here in Katy for the Tri-County area. I am absolutely delighted today to introduce to you Kevin Troutman. I bet all of you on the line know him. He has been an active member in the community for many years. We have asked Kevin to come in and talk about workforce issues that relative to the legal aspect of what's happening. And as Kevin and I were talking even before we actually went live, there's a lot happening and a lot that we can talk about. Please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I will be monitoring those and will be glad to offer them to Kevin until we open up the Q&A after he's finished his remarks. So let's make this interactive. And sir, we are just delighted to have you. Kevin, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Jeanette. I appreciate that. And I'm happy to be here with you, at least through the cyber connection. The topic today, the subtopic, I guess, bringing back a confident workforce is rooted in my background as not only a lawyer who counsels employers on a day-to-day basis, but also my background in human resources, recognizing how important it is for employees to come to work confidently and in a collaborative way every day. So now that we're trying to adjust to a completely new type of environment, a new set of rules, I'm not going to focus so much on specifics as to CDC or OSHA or anything like that. We've talked about those in some prior webinars, and I think this group has too, but I'm going to talk more a little bit about the people side and especially the legal aspects and keeping my HR hat on as well, because that's who I deal with on a day-to-day basis most of the time, is people in HR and business ownership roles and that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about what we can do to make the workers confident as they come back, because as they're confident, they're also comfortable. They work better together. They work with their peers more effectively and deliver a better overall service for a company. So that's what we're going to do. And let's kind of jump into some of the key issues that I want to talk about. You know, to have a successful return to work, and this is a process. Nobody thinks we just snap our fingers and do this. We've all been through quite an ordeal over the last few months, and this is going to continue to be a process, and it's going to move slowly. So it starts with preparation. Some of you are already back to work or are in the process of preparing to bring more people back to work. Maybe some of your workforce is at home, some is in the office. So we need to take all those things into account. But on the preparation side, we want to make sure our protocols are in place. And each workplace is going to be a little bit different. But whatever they are, you need to have your safe workplace protocols in place before employees start coming back into that workspace. That may come from a safety committee. It may come from another group that you identify. But there has to be some leadership within the organization who's taking responsibility for being very well versed on what the requirements are for your company and your industry, and putting those protocols in place. And it can not only just the things we hear about all the time, hand washing and face covering and those sorts of things, distancing, but things like laying out a workspace where maybe you put signs on the floor where everything is sort of one way and employees all go in a particular direction. Those are all things that may fit in your workspace. They may not, but those are things to consider. And as you do that, then you've also got to communicate. And I'm going to really emphasize communication throughout my presentation today, because that's how we make a workplace confident and competent. They have to understand what our goals are, how our procedures have changed, what we're doing to protect them, and we have to make that all work. And that's going to require a lot of different kinds of communication. Cleaning and disinfection is something that everybody's thought about and talks about a lot. That's obviously part of the picture. One of the areas that I just want to touch on as you prepare is cleaning and disinfecting are not functions that all your employees are necessarily accustomed to. Maybe they're not accustomed to being in a setting where things are being cleaned and disinfected as often as they will be now. So you've got to include that in your communications plan to make sure that the people who are doing this work are trained properly and know what their role is and how to protect themselves and how to protect others, and that other employees in the workplace know what's going to be happening, where to find supplies they need, what responsibilities they have for cleaning around their own workspaces. So there's a lot of different areas to think about there, and we'll touch on that some more. Your healthy workforce, you want to make sure that you're only bringing back people who are prepared to come back into the workplace. You don't want people coming in who are sick, and we never have. That's not something new, but it's something that we're having to emphasize more now. And probably if there's some good things that come out of this experience, and there probably are a few, well, maybe that's one, that we focus more on maintaining a healthy workplace and encouraging employees to stay home if they're sick, whether it involves symptoms of coronavirus or whether it involves something else, seasonal flu or anything else that might bring some sort of illness or situation into the workplace that would make others sick. So we want to have a wider consciousness of what it takes to maintain a healthy workplace. Signage, believe it or not, and you probably do believe it because you see it everywhere, is another important aspect of preparing to reopen, making sure that you're helping employees know where to go, who to talk to, what to do, and that customers and visitors know where to go and what to do, and who to ask when they have questions. So those are all things that we need to think about and address on the front end as we're preparing and planning for people to return to the workplace. As I mentioned, that includes customers, visitors, and everybody else. So what are some scenarios that occur once you start to bring people back into the workplace? What are some of the common questions that we're seeing once that happens? There are employees who are afraid to return. And under normal circumstances, we may say, well, if you don't want to come to work, you're fired. That might have been the old mindset. But even then, and certainly now, we need to take a patient and even-handed approach. So if employees are afraid of returning to work or they refuse, the first thing to do is ask them why. Don't just slam the door and say, well, you don't want to work here, that's fine. Find out why the employee doesn't want to return to work and see if you can find a way to identify their concerns and address those concerns and hopefully allay some of their fears. There may be some sort of an accommodation that you might make. You might move them to a different part of their office, or you might just provide information to tell them about things that they didn't know regarding potential dangers in the workplace. The general rule under OSHA standards is that employees really can't refuse to return to work unless there's a specific identifiable threat. But again, this is not a time and this is not a place to be too heavy-handed. So I think it's very important when an employee is concerned about returning or says they refuse to return, engage them in some conversation. Another example is you may have an employee who doesn't want to return to work, perhaps because they're in one of these high-risk groups and they feel that they'd be particularly susceptible to COVID and they don't want to be exposed. They think it might have a really negative impact on them, more so than much of the rest of the population. So in that case, you may have an ADA accommodation kind of situation. So under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, we have a legal duty to talk to the employee and find out what's going on and determine whether there is some reasonable accommodation that we can make that would enable the employee to perform their duties. So that's one that comes up a lot, and my advice in a nutshell is talk to the employees and listen. Listening is an important part of this communication equation that we talk about. Other things that are happening, and Lots of employers are doing this, taking temperatures of everybody who visits the workplace. We're seeing that in a lot of places, not everywhere, but it's something that seems to be a good practice. It seems to be endorsed, and the EEOC doesn't have a problem with doing this under the current environment. We're still under a pandemic. We're still facing a national crisis. And so taking temperatures and screening people who come into the workplace seems to be a good idea. So you're not an outlier if that's something you're going to do. Now, if you're going to do it, you also want to have criteria that you're going to apply and determine who's going to do it, how they're going to do it, and how we're going to keep that temperature taker safe when they perform this function. But that's something we're seeing a lot of. We're also seeing masks in the workplace. Now, it's interesting, as I move around different parts of Katy, for the most part, that's mostly where I've been, and I haven't been out a whole lot. But as I have been, I'm seeing fewer and fewer people wearing masks, which raises some concern, particularly if they're in situations where they're going to be within 6 feet of other people, which you try to avoid. But in the workplace, we would generally encourage making masks available and encouraging employees to wear masks, at least when they're in areas where they may encounter other people. If they're able to have a workstation where they're in a room, maybe with the door closed by themselves. When I'm in my office, which I haven't been back to my office yet, but when I am, all of us will be in situations where we're able to close the door and basically distance that way. We'll be far more than 6 feet away from other people. But we'll still wear masks as we walk outside of the office, or if someone were to come into the office. And if they were, they may not come all the way in. They may just come to the door and they'd wear a mask, I'd wear a mask. So that's a pretty widely acceptable protocol and something that we see most folks doing. There was some guidance from OSHA just within the last few days about whether cloth masks are personal protective equipment, PPEs. And why does that matter? If an employer provides PPEs, then the employer has to do some other things that OSHA requires, not only a hazard assessment, which you would do anyway, but you have to do training, and you have to document that training on how to use that PPE, how to keep it clean, how to know when to discard it, how to handle it safely. But cloth masks, OSHA seems to be taking the position that those are not PPEs. Now, employees may bring their own, or you may provide them in the workplace. We're giving, in our office, employees the choice. They can bring their own mask, or we'll have masks there for employees and visitors. But that's something we're seeing a lot of. And again, does that make people comfortable? Even if we were at a point, or you're in a business where you don't necessarily require a mask, if an employee wants to wear one and that makes them feel better, unless there's a good reason not to let them wear it, then let them do it. Help them to feel more comfortable in the workplace where they're trying to perform their duties under new circumstances. What about fitness for duty exams? Can we do it? Under the ADA, the EEOC certainly says that when under these circumstances, we have a reason to want to make sure that our employees are free from any kind of virus or contagious condition, and that they're able to perform their duties. So that might be a reasonable request to ask employees to undergo a fitness for duty exam, maybe to get cleared by their doctor before they come back. The question is that going to be feasible? Are they able to do that? Again, I think that's where it's important for employers to try to remain flexible. The more flexible and the more communications you're willing to have with employees, the more you're able to deal with these kinds of situations. It may take a little longer for an employee to get back to work. You may be able to find a way for the employee, maybe using the symptom check as opposed to the test check that the CDC has recommended, to get them back in that way. So there are different ways to approach this. So flexibility is just an important part of the overall picture here. Screening questionnaires, again, a good idea to ask employees whether they've had a fever, whether they've had any of the other COVID symptoms. And the questionnaire is good because it gives you that list. You don't have to remember what those issues are. You can just refer to the list and go through the questions with the employees. And if they're having symptoms, then you may refer them back to see a healthcare provider before you bring them into the workplace. But we're seeing a lot of these questionnaires. Some people have asked about, should we test employees every day? Generally, I'm not an advocate of testing every day. I'm not sure that that accomplishes a whole lot as compared, let's say, to the symptom screening and that sort of thing. But every workplace is a little different. There are some places where that seems to be more appropriate, but that's probably less often. But let's say you have an employee who tests positive. What do you need to do? Well, one of the things you need to do is make sure that they're not going to spread the virus in the workplace. So you want to talk to them about being seen and staying out of the workplace until they can clear either the symptom or the the negative test to come back in. But you'll also need to determine whether they've had close contact with any other folks to determine whether they've had contact with other employees who might be exposed or customers or visitors, so that we can notify them that there may have been an exposure. Maybe there wasn't an exposure and hopefully there was no transmittal, but we may have an obligation then to let these other folks know, certainly our other employees know, and visitors with whom this employee had contact, that they may have been exposed. But the issue that we have to keep in mind there too is workplace privacy. If you've had an employee who tests positive, unless that employee consents for us to identify them, to use their personal information, then we shouldn't identify them. We can talk to the employees who may have been exposed about when it may have happened and where it may have happened, but we need to maintain the confidentiality and the privacy of the employees. So whether you're screening, whether you're testing, whether you're collecting other health-related information, if you're an employer, the information you're collecting in that capacity is not HIPAA covered, but it's still confidential, it's still private, and it should be treated that way. And even in Texas, believe it or not, we're one of about 5 states now that have privacy statutes related to employees' personal identifiable information, specifically biometrics in the case that I'm thinking about. But data privacy is something that matters, and it's becoming more and more important. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. So let's say you keep a temperature or you do a temperature screening. I don't necessarily believe that you ought to keep those records other than to show that you did the screening on a particular day. And then you may either destroy those records or certainly keep them in a very confidential place, because you don't want your employees' confidential records of screening getting out to anybody. That's very confidential and should be treated as top secret proprietary type of information. Excuse me, I'm a little dry today. Attention to rebuilding trust, loyalty, and engagement. This is a big topic. As I've talked to employers over the last 3 months or so, one of the things that they've constantly been concerned about is keeping their employees. I've been really encouraged and felt really good about hearing employers say how much their employees mean to them and how much they want to look out for their welfare and how much they want to keep those good employees because they need them. Well, you still want to do that. This is still part of what we're doing now, trying to re-engage them at work and trying to get them back into some sort of a routine, into sort of redoing or re-engaging in the workplace. So how do we do that? I would like to be able to talk strictly about the post-pandemic environment right now, but as you all know, there have been other incidents that have occurred in the world and in the country over the last 3 weeks or so, and the protest activities, the social justice discussions, the political aspects of that. Those are all things that people have heard about and talked about and care about. And the the murder of Mr. Floyd was horrible for everybody to witness, and that's something that has certainly riveted us and captured our attention. And again, people view those things differently and view the related issues differently. So right now, emotions are even higher in the workplace because not only has that been an issue that's captured employees' attention, but we're still trying to deal with all of the issues related to the pandemic and returning to work. So it's especially important for us to exhibit an atmosphere of patience and trust and respect. And that's how we build loyalty in the workplace. And hopefully we had good loyalty already, but it's important to maintain that now by demonstrating the trust and by listening. Jeanette and I were talking earlier about how people learn through experience and sometimes learn through mistakes. And part of what we all have to be able to do and willing to do is just to listen and to re-examine how we deal with different issues and how we evaluate issues, and we have to learn from mistakes that we make, whatever those mistakes may be. So that's kind of the environment that we need to really strive for, is one of patience, trust, and respect, and rebuilding trust and loyalty within our employee group. That means we've got to pay attention to other things too, pay and benefits. Not only do we need to remain competitive, but in some cases, I've talked to clients who adjusted employees' pay and benefits for some period of time, or maybe the employee was on unemployment, maybe they were receiving the Families First Coronavirus Act benefits. So there's a whole lot of scenarios that may have been involved. There are cases where I've talked to clients who had exempt employees who were on some sort of a furlough. Maybe they were 1 week on and 1 week off. Well, all of those things need to be looked at to bring the workforce and the workplace back to a more normal kind of environment. And that includes looking at pay and benefits, because that's an area that seems to be one that's attracting the attention of a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers. And that's something we may want to talk about in a future session, is the kinds of litigation that we think are going to be emerging from this crisis. But for now, there needs to be a real focus on getting pay and benefits back where they need to be and communicating with employees about it. You're going to have employees with child care issues who might not have had child care issues before, but the environment has changed. We've had the question come up, well, can we offer child care? That's not something that an employer can just snap their fingers and do. Child care facilities have to be licensed and they're highly regulated. So there's not an easy fix, but what is important and is, at least in the first steps, is easy to do, that's to listen and to talk to employees about whatever their issues are with respect to child care. And again, try to be flexible and keep in mind that depending on the specific facts, they may have a right to some of the benefits that I'll touch on again in a minute that come from the Families First Coronavirus Act. So there are a lot of issues that will arise there. On a broader plane, we need to be looking as employers to identify what are the problems that we see in the workplace. What are those problems and how can we resolve them? There may be problems because I heard one just a day or two ago where there were employees who were mad at each other because of different political perspectives. Well, one thing that can help is to remind employees in a respectful way that the workplace is first of all a place to work. So when you're at work, you're supposed to be engaging in work. And when you're on breaks, when you're on meal breaks, etc., you need to be respectful toward others and tolerant toward others. And keep in mind the policies that we've had in place all along in terms of maintaining a respectful workplace. But as employers, it's especially important now for us to identify problems and help show employees that we're there to resolve those problems. And that means if somebody's concerned about a safety issue, if they think that we're not maintaining a clean and safe and virus-free workplace, listen to them, listen to what they have to say, and talk with them about it, review policies with them, show them what we're doing, show them things they may not know about. They may say, we need a different system for the way we manage our elevators. We need a different system for the way we deal with our restroom facilities. Listen to employees. There may be other issues that have changed because of the change in the workplace, pandemic-related issues that make their job duties more difficult to perform. Again, if we can be problem solvers, if we can listen, it's going to help us retain good employees. It's going to help us be more productive. And along with that just comes an overall workplace safety consciousness. Coronavirus is not the only issue that we have to be concerned about. So we should always, and I think we probably did this before, make safety a high priority in the workplace and make sure employees know that. Now, who are some of the key people that we need to lean on here? Supervisors and management. And I should say, Jeanette mentioned this a little bit earlier. We'll answer your questions as we go, but I'm going to try to cover 45 minutes or so of presentation and then leave 15, 20 minutes toward the end for questions, just so that you have a sense of what we're doing in that respect. Because I know initially we've been trying to do these sessions a little shorter, but there's a lot of interest, a lot of questions. So we'll go up to 60 minutes total. But nonetheless, the point here is management and supervisors are absolutely the face of the company. They represent us. That's who employees see. And that's who they identify with the company. So we've got to be sure they're prepared and they're comfortable to do their jobs. And that means we have to train them on all the changes we've made, that whatever new policies we adopt, any new protocols that we follow, that our managers and supervisors understand them, can answer questions about them, and are going to be respectful and patient with employees who have questions. Because employees and others, whether it's customers or other stakeholders in our business, they're going to have questions. And one of the worst things that can happen is if an employee has a question and the supervisor gets exasperated with that employee instead of listening to them and helping them get an answer that they can use. So it's critical to support managers and supervisors, give them the information they need, and to make sure that they understand the importance of their role and how much you're depending on them to help represent the whole company in working with everybody who they supervise and everybody they come in contact with. Another thing that's critical is to share updates about the company, about the business with your employees. You don't want them to hear about things first on the news or in the newspaper, if anybody reads the newspaper. I don't know if they do. But anyway, to get information from you and to know what we're doing, why we're doing it. Share as much information as you can. We know you can't share every detail of the business, but the more employees understand, the more engaged and the more they're going to buy into what it is that you're trying to do. So I talked about communications earlier, and I'm going to emphasize that again here to keep employees and to keep them productive and to keep them engaged effectively with your customers and with each other. You need to keep communicating, and that means plan time to communicate, schedule it, determine who's going to carry that message out to the employees. There may be times where the CEO is the right person to deliver a message. There might be other times where first line supervisors are the people to do it. Maybe it's something that you post on a company intranet site. You've got to think through that, but those are all methods that you can use to deliver information to employees, and it's important that we do. Excuse me. One of the advantages to having a co-presenter is they don't have to talk the whole time. So excuse me while I sip some tea from time to time. Think about what messages you want to deliver about how's the company doing. What are we doing in terms of opening up and phasing our reopening? What are we doing in terms of allowing people to telecommute or work remotely? How is our business doing? How are our customers doing? Those are all things that our employees want to know about. Those are all things that can usually be shared. So think about what you can do, and especially Talk to them about things that are really going to directly affect them. Are there changes that you anticipate, new policies that they're going to have to follow? Make sure that you're giving them notice and explaining the issues to them. More about communication. One of the most important things that we convey in everything that we do and say is that we care about our employees and that we respect them as individuals. But like I said, tell them about business plans. Tell them we're going to keep them informed. But when you tell them that, make sure you back that up. Don't forget that you need to keep employees in the loop and distribute policies as you need to. Make them aware of resources in the community if you're able to do that, that you think are of interest to them as employees. I've worked with employers. I've worked with Jeanette in the past. It's good to help employees and help others know what resources are out there. Sometimes people don't know, and if you can help connect people with others who can be of help to them, that's such a rewarding experience for you as a company and for you as leaders to help your employees get the assistance that they need and get questions answered that maybe aren't work questions, but just general questions that they have. So again, it's important to engage and keep that communication flowing, and overall to let employees know that you care about them. We need to communicate with all employees, which means we don't forget about those who are working remotely. Depending on the industry and depending on who you ask, various proportions of employees are back in the office, and some are still working remotely. In our case, with our law firm, we have probably now less than half of our employees in the office, and we're doing that intentionally because that helps to maintain distancing. But coming to the office when they're able to is certainly helpful. They're able to get the files and things that they need to put their hands on at times. But don't forget about those that are working remotely. We're trying to rotate that schedule. And you may do that, but there may be some companies and some businesses where you're not able to have as many remote workers. In other businesses, maybe you're able to maintain a lot of remote workers. And you, of course, have to evaluate how that works for you in the long term. We do think that we'll see businesses sort of reinventing themselves in some ways. And we may see jobs that weren't remote before, but become remote as a result of all this. So just don't forget about those folks. We don't want it to be out of sight, out of mind. You want to include them in your communications. Make sure that you're communicating with customers, letting them know if your hours are different than they were before, what other kinds of changes or what other things you're doing that they'd be interested in, new services you're offering. I know in the hospitality industry, I've seen a lot of innovation with restaurants, for example, offering new menu items or to-go options that they didn't offer before. There's a lot of creativity among our workplace and our peers out there. And so tap into that, but communication helps everybody do that more effectively. Things that you need to think about if you have employees working remotely, and a lot of you probably do, make sure you have a policy in place that addresses some of the key issues that come up in remote work, and that includes, one, you have to make the right technology and equipment available for them, but how's the work process going to work? How do employees account for their time? How do you make sure if someone's working at home, under the traditional rules, if an employee, a non-exempt employee, takes a lunch break, they do that away from their desk. If they're in an office and they go to a lunchroom or a restaurant or a cafeteria or whatever the case may be, well, what if they're working from home? Do you have any rules on that? Do you have guidance on that? And how do you make sure they account for their time correctly? Because they're supposed to have an uninterrupted meal break if we're not paying them for that meal break. And the meal break really ought to be at least a half an hour under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So you ought to have a written policy where you think through those things. Sometimes I find that people may think, well, gosh, policies, just more books, more paper, more bureaucracy. But policies are a real help when they set up a framework that allows you to be consistent in what you're doing and to make sure that people know what to expect and how things will work. Some things to keep in mind during the first several weeks of this crisis. And after the act was initially passed, the Families First Response Act, we were hearing a lot of discussion about emergency paid sick leave and emergency FMLA leave. Well, those benefits are still in effect, and you may still have employees who qualify for those benefits. So don't lose track of that. And again, if you don't have a policy on that, you probably should have some sort of a policy, because there's some interaction there between these leaves and any pre-existing leaves that your employees had been accruing. So it's a good idea to have a policy and integrate that policy with your other existing policies, because this is something that's going to be around for several more months at least now, and you'll have scenarios where this will be applicable. Just as a refresher, and I'll make this PowerPoint available so that if anybody needs to look this up, you certainly can. But these are the situations that qualify for emergency paid sick leave, and we're still seeing a lot of these. And as there is, as we talked about earlier, there's an increase, potentially at least, in the number of people who are infected. You're going to see more positive test results for sure, because more testing is being done. And if more people are coming down with the virus, then you're going to have people who've been advised to self-quarantine, or they're experiencing symptoms and they're seeking a medical diagnosis. So those are situations that are going to qualify for the emergency paid sick leave. Keep in mind that that's capped at 80 hours for this year, but it's a benefit that is eligible, or that employees are eligible for. Almost all employees will be eligible if you have less than 500 employees. And we're already seeing some lawsuits based on failure to provide these benefits. Don't forget, if you do provide the benefits, that you can take a payroll tax credit to offset the cost of the benefits when you pay them. And I have this slide here for the emergency FMLA leave. That's also in play, and that has to do with the employee can't work because of childcare issues. And you're probably familiar with this, but you'll have the slide if you need it. We certainly encourage you to use a form to help you manage these leaves, because again, it helps keep you consistent, and it helps make sure you collect the information you need if you need to eventually claim that payroll tax credit that you'll want to take advantage of if you pay the benefit. Here's a few more points that we'll cover. Think about developing or enhancing your social media presence. That gives you another way to regularly engage your workforce. You may or may not like that idea, but it's certainly something to think about, and it's something that some companies find is very productive, to have some sort of a social media presence, and that way you can highlight information, encourage employees, do a lot of things, promote special events. I think it's definitely worth looking at. Also consider things like supervisors doing some kind of rounds or updates at the beginning of each shift. Now, the idea is to offer words of support and encouragement and gratitude toward employees. But in this world, if employees are making rounds, they also have to keep social distancing and a safe workplace in mind. And in a lot of workplaces, that can certainly be done. But that positive feedback to employees certainly helps create a confident and a positive environment. Other things to think about: make sure the lines of communication are clear in terms of where questions are supposed to go, how they're supposed to be handled. Keep the communication regular. Consider things like town hall meetings, even online town hall meetings, because you don't want to gather a group of employees physically together, say in a conference room like we would have just a little over 3 months ago. Provide email updates, provide information on what's going on and what employees should look forward to and expect. You could set up a feedback portal to solicit questions on your intranet or even on your social media site. Research things like job placement sites for comments and reviews to see what people are talking about. What are they concerned about? Consider, I should underline that word, consider conducting employee engagement surveys, even short surveys. But here's the caveat. And if Jeanette were on here talking right now, she would tell you exactly what I'm going to tell you: is do not ask if you're not prepared to respond. Don't take a survey if you're not going to follow up on it. So consider doing it, But if you do, understand you've got to make a commitment then to follow up on whatever you hear. Some companies have used skip level meetings, which essentially allows higher level employees to have some sort of a way to communicate with other employees without necessarily having to go through the chain of command. And in an unusual environment like this, that access might be helpful. It's not something you do all the time, but it's an option to keep in mind. And with that, I've covered the materials that I wanted to go over with you, and we have a few minutes to cover questions and listen to things that are on your mind. But I hope this gave you some thoughts about what you can do to not only bring the workplace back online in a safe way, but in a productive and confident way.
Oh, Kevin, lots of good questions. Let me just tee up the first one for you. Are employees required to tell their employers if they have tested positive for COVID?
I would say, one of the things I always say to employers is, there's what's legal and there's what's right. And we always try to do what's right. We don't want to go right up to the line of what's legal and illegal. Are employees required to disclose this? This goes back to what I talked about with policies and daily screening. We should have policies in place, and actually we have some examples. You see fisherphillips.com. We have some things on the website that are free if you want to take a look, but you should have policies in place that tell employees what their role is in maintaining a safe workplace. And part of that is not bringing infections or viruses into the workplace. And so basically, yeah, they're required to tell you, you should be doing screening. You should have employees certify that they're complying with your policies. And they have both an employer duty and really a moral duty to let you know if they've tested positive, because if they come into your workplace and they have the virus, they're exposing others to that, and that's a real serious problem for us. So we should not allow that. And if we've gone so far as to say if somebody's experiencing symptoms, send them home. Well, certainly if they've tested positive, they need to let you know. But back that up with your policies.
Okay, great advice. Someone asks if an employee comes, and they usually come to HR and says, so and so has tested positive. I know that he or she told me. What is the role of the company at that point? The employee has not chosen to tell you, and then somebody else comes and says, I know for a fact that they've tested positive.
I'm just wondering who's coming up with these questions, because they're good. But I will tell you that I don't like those scenarios generally. And some of the ways that I think we can work around something like that is that I think it's a good idea to do daily screenings and taking temperatures and asking employees about whether they've been exposed, and asking them about symptoms, and having those policies in place, telling employees what we expect. But if an employee does come to you and they say, this employee down the hall has tested positive or is showing symptoms or whatever the case may be, under these emergency circumstances, I think, one, we need to make sure that employee has given us all the details they have, the person who's reporting, and that they say that they're willing to go on record with what they're telling you, that they're not going to change their story. And if you get all that nailed down, then I would investigate that and talk to the employee. Let's look and first of all see, have they been screened daily? Have they signed off on our policy? Have we seen anything? Talk to their supervisor. Has their supervisor seen anything? Try to gather as much information as you can, and then determine whether you need to go back to that employee and ask them maybe to review your screening tool and your policy, and find out what's going on. I don't think now is a time to escalate confrontational kinds of situations. So I would try to get at it by gathering information and asking questions, as opposed to just going down the hall and saying, get the heck out of here. But it depends on how much of a risk this person poses. If they're working in a position where they're interacting with a lot of people, and you just heard that they're exhibiting symptoms, you need to get them out of there quicker. So evaluate the level of risk and then decide what the appropriate level of action is. But I don't think you can ignore that.
Okay. The next question's just as much of a doozy. How far do we have to, as employers, have to go in allowing discussion of politics in the workplace?
You know, I think it's very important to remind employees that everybody's entitled to an opinion and that they're in the workplace to work. Employees do have rights to express their opinions. And there's all kinds of opinions. You know, there's religious and political, and you know, the discussion recently has been kind of centered around the social justice issue, and in particular the issues posed by law enforcement and interactions between law enforcement and the community, and specifically between the African American community. So there are a lot of serious issues. And I would just encourage everybody, first of all, to be respectful. If they want to talk about these issues while they're on a break, while they're off duty, you know, we're not going to tell them they can't do it. But first of all, they're going to have a hard time doing that because in our social distancing environment, I'm not sure they're going to be in a place where they can do that while they're off duty. And while they're on duty, they need to work. And that's what we need to encourage them to do as much as possible. In this environment, I think people are going to be a little further apart for the most part. And we need to try to redirect those discussions out of the workplace and certainly away from customers and that sort of thing, because that's not what customers come to us for. But we need to do it in a respectful way.
So a question that I would add, I see that Starbucks is now allowing their baristas to wear Black Lives Matter t-shirts, whether it's a pin or an indicia or, you know, some kind of logo or a t-shirt. Can we restrict that display of political position?
You know, we've talked for a long time about people wearing buttons and people wearing insignias and things like that in the workplace. And one of the things that we've always said is, do you have a policy that sets your expectations and your dress code? Have you enforced it consistently? And if you have, it puts you in a better position to at least enforce your policy. But if a company decides that they are going to allow political expression or other kinds of expression, say on a cap or on a shirt or on an apron or some other insignia, you have to think about some things. What if somebody else comes along and says, I want to place some expression of my religious beliefs on my apron or my hat or something like that? You got to think through those things carefully. I generally say we should try to keep politics out of the workplace, but if you decide, because you think it's the right thing to do, to allow employees to wear, say, a Black Lives Matter insignia at work, if that's the position your corporation or your company takes, that's your call. But you're going to face issues where somebody else may say, what about me and my opposite belief, or my religious belief, or my belief in something else, another issue? How are you going to handle that? You need to think through it. And you also need, if you've decided as a company that you're going to permit employees or encourage employees to do something like that, you need to make sure that all employees are aware of it, because you don't want some other employee deciding that they're going to take issue with it, because that's a decision that the company has made. Good question, and a tough question.
Absolutely, absolutely. These questions aren't getting any easier. So
we're about out of time, Jeanette.
Yeah, yeah. Do we start afresh with employees? So if we have someone that we've been having performance issues with, and assuming that we begin to see rumbles that they really haven't gone away in the time that people haven't been in the office or at the work site, how soon do we begin to deal with them? And are we at ground zero and building a new case, or is this a continuation, even though there's been perhaps as long as 90 days between episodes or incidents?
Yeah, that's another good question. And, you know, I don't think we can ignore the fact that we've been away for 90 days, but at the same time, you've got to evaluate, and we say this in a lot of policies that we draft, you have to evaluate the seriousness of each offense on its own merits, on its own facts. So let's take an extreme example because that makes it maybe a little easier. If you've had someone who you've had to counsel maybe twice because they've been extremely rude and offensive to customers, or maybe they have uh, been very rude and offensive to fellow employees. And you warned them about it and you told them it was going to be their last opportunity to improve. And let's say that happened back February the 15th, and they're back at work for a couple of weeks and they do it again. Under those circumstances, you've got to think about what are the safety issues, what are our duties as an employer. We're supposed to maintain a workplace that's free of harassment and illegal discrimination. If somebody's conduct may be bordering on harassment or discrimination, we may not be able to tolerate it anymore. So I wouldn't say that we go back to ground zero, but I would say that we recognize that people have been away from work for some period of time, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it may be. And we take that into consideration. But I think you also have to consider the seriousness of the offense and how many times it's happened before. So I would look at the facts of the situation and make that determination.
Well said, well said. One of the issues that the task force has been looking at is the one of mental health. And employees are likely to see symptoms or see the inner turmoil that someone might be struggling with more closely than even immediate supervisors. Any suggestions on counseling for employees that see someone seems to be struggling with depression, and that's all as a layperson's assessment? Oh, that person looks depressed, or that person's drinking too much, or whatever the symptom might be that the employee reports. Any suggestions on how to work with that individual or individuals?
I have some thoughts, and again, a good issue, a very timely issue, because people have been stressed. They're still stressed. This has been a very difficult time, so we're likely to see more of those kinds of issues. One thing that I would suggest everyone consider, if they're not already doing it, is to have some sort of an employee assistance program, an EAP, because if you have some sort of a source already set up where you can refer employees who are having a problem, and that problem may be a financial problem, it may be a family marital problem or something like that, or it may be a mental health issue. But if there's a place that is available where employees can turn for assistance, that's invaluable. So even if you don't already have an EAP, you ought to look at establishing one. But if you've got issues that you are noticing that somebody seems to be troubled, somebody seems to be behaving differently, those are the kinds of things in really a workplace safety and an employee safety environment, we want to notice. And I think whoever takes that report should take it seriously, gather information. Again, I would go back, let's say HR gets the information. HR is in a position then to look at that employee's record. Do we know about any other problems this person has been experiencing, or any other unusual behavior? We can talk to the supervisor. How is Joe doing? Have you noticed anything out of the ordinary? You may find out more. There may be enough there to talk to him maybe based on supervisors' observations, or putting all this together, where you talk to the employee at least and say, look, we'd like to ask you to go see this person with our employee assistance program, or here's this person we can refer you to help you. This is not a mark against you. We would like to help you, and here's a suggestion. But I would, again, gather information, and don't just go, down and talk to somebody and say, your coworker just said that you're about to lose it. We don't want to do that, but we can certainly finesse it and gather some information, and then determine at what level we approach the individual who may need our help. But I certainly wouldn't ignore it.
Yeah, well said, well said. So the final question, are employers obligated to pay for Wi-Fi? One employer says, we know that people have Wi-Fi in their homes anyway.
Remember what we said about what's legal and what's right?
Okay.
If you're asking employees to use their Wi-Fi to work for you, you got to think about that. They're not obligated legally to. Employers are not obligated legally to pay or reimburse employees for use of their personal Wi-Fi, unless you get in a situation, and this doesn't sound like it's very likely to happen, unless that cost, which you caused them to incur to perform work for you, brings them below the minimum wage. You might be legally obligated them to reimburse them, just like you would be if you made them go out and buy a uniform, or go out and buy some other tool or equipment that they have to use for work. You might be obligated in that case. But if we're talking about Wi-Fi, I think that's more of an employee relations issue than it is a legal issue, most likely. And I would say you've got to determine what works best for you. And just to give you a couple of quick examples, we've had lots of employers who've talked about giving employees some additional pay for stepping up and dealing with unusual circumstances during this time. And they've given them an extra $1 or $2 an hour. It may be that in this situation, when people are working from home, maybe you do something else for them to help them with whatever costs they may have incurred. But I think the better way is probably to tell them, if they incur expenses, submit a receipt and get reimbursed per our policy, unless they can establish that there's really some unusual incremental cost associated with their Wi-Fi use. I don't think that's necessarily a reimbursable issue, and it may be somebody just trying to sort of see how far they can get with the request. I don't know. But I wouldn't just jump and say, oh, yeah, we have to do that. But I'd listen to it and see, is there an employee relations issue here? And is there something we can do to deal with it in a fair way?
Well, Kevin, as we usually do, we have really tapped your great expertise. And so I really appreciate all the great information that you've provided. Just as a wrap up, I'd like to remind people that this presentation has been recorded. It will be available on the Return to Workforce Task Force landing site, and the same location that you registered for this webinar. So if you'd like to get this information, please don't hesitate. At the bottom of Kevin's slides, you may have noticed that Fisher Phillips has also provided information, and the location is noted in the footer of his presentation. In closing, these webinars have been set up around 4 pillars, which are the basis for our task force. It is medical, it's people, it's financial, and strategic. So if anyone has a topic or something that you'd like to share with this audience, it's free to anyone. You don't have to be a member or a constituent of any particular organization. If you live in the Katy Tri-County area, we welcome you and hope that you will join us. The website does also have a pledge, Return to Work Safely, and we'd really encourage all our employers to take a look at that, read through what it requires, and then sign on. Our hope is both to provide authoritative information like we've done today with Kevin, and also to prevent that second wave of infection. So as my hiking buddy said to me the other day, a British woman, she said, "I wish all of you good day and good health." So with that, we'll sign off, and thanks for joining. Thank you so much, Kevin. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
All right.